It begins with a single object, held in the controlled atmosphere of a museum archive. A tablet of baked clay, catalog number CBS 14051, excavated from the temple library of Nippur. It is cool to the touch, dense with the weight of 4 millennia. Its surface is covered in the tight angular script of Sumerian cuneiform, a language that has been silent for most of human history. The marks were pressed into wet clay by a scribe whose name is lost, whose hands have long since turned to dust. This is not a grand monument or a king's treasure. It is a piece of administration, a record filed away in an archive that was never meant to be disturbed. It is an entry in a ledger of cosmic events. The tablet is one of many fragments that form a larger composition, known to us as the Lament for Ur. The text records the destruction of that great city around 2004 BCE. But it is not a human history, not a chronicle of armies or politics. It is framed as a theological document, a report on a divine failure. The script details the pleas of the city's patron deity, the moon god Nana, and his consort, Ningal. They beg the high council of the gods, led by Enlil, to spare their city. The plea is denied. The city is annihilated. The record is clear on this point. The gods in charge of the city were unable to protect it. The document does not stop there. It proceeds to record, in meticulous detail, the grief of the god Nana. He is depicted weeping, lamenting his own powerlessness. He mourns his temple, his people, his storehouses now filled with the dead. This is the first point of friction, the first quiet question that arises from the clay. Why would a state-sponsored scribe, working within the central religious institution of the civilization, be tasked with creating a permanent record of a primary deity's impotence? It is an administrative entry documenting the collapse of a divine promise, filed away for posterity. For those who wish to continue this line of inquiry, it is best to subscribe. This ensures you will be present when the next file is opened. It is a quiet way to maintain access to the archive. We are conditioned to see such texts as metaphor, as poetry designed to explain human suffering. But the form contradicts this interpretation. The structure of the lament is rigid, almost liturgical. It follows a predictable pattern, one found in other, similar texts mourning the fall of other cities. The language is precise, not effusive. It reads less like an outpouring of grief, and more like a formal after-action report, an official accounting of a catastrophic system failure. The emotion is documented, but the documentation itself is cold, procedural. The silence of the archive feels heavy here, surrounding this small clay object that holds such a profound contradiction. This tablet from Nippur is not an anomaly. It is an example of a genre. The Divine Lament was a recurring form of literature in ancient Sumer. There are laments for Eridu, for Uruk, for Lagash. Each follows a similar pattern. The city is destroyed by forces beyond its control, and its patron deity is recorded as being unable, or in some cases, unwilling, to intervene. The pattern suggests this was not an isolated incident to be explained away, but a systemic feature of the cosmos as the Sumerians understood it. It was a known operational risk, a possibility that required its own specific category of documentation. To remain near this kind of record is to acknowledge the weight of the pattern itself. It is a quiet recognition that some questions are not meant for loud places. Keeping this file close is a way of staying with the inquiry, of not losing the trail in the noise of more comfortable histories. The focus then shifts from the content of the tablet to the one who created it. The scribe. This was not a dissident or a revolutionary. He was a functionary, a highly trained professional at the heart of the temple bureaucracy. His work was to maintain the continuity of the record, to ensure that what happened was preserved exactly as it was meant to be. He was not an artist expressing a private vision, but an archivist fulfilling a duty. And that duty, it seems, included the precise and unsentimental documentation of divine failure. His hand was steady. His stylus pressed each wedge into the clay with the same care he would use for a list of grain sacks or a legal contract. What is most unsettling is not the failure of the god, but the calm, administrative nature of its recording. There is no theological crisis presented in the text, no questioning of the cosmic order itself. The event is simply entered into the record. The grief of Nana is catalogued with the same dispassion as an inventory of temple livestock. This suggests that such events, while tragic, were considered a normal part of the system's operation. A god's inability to protect his own city was not a reason to lose faith. It was simply a fact to be noted, filed, and preserved in the great libraries for future reference. And so, we are left not with an answer, but with a more refined question. We are no longer asking why a god would fail. We are asking why a civilization would feel compelled to create a meticulous bureaucratic archive of those failures. What purpose did it serve to preserve with such precision the evidence that the managers of the cosmos were fallible? What understanding of the universe required that the limits of the gods be documented as a matter of official record? The question hangs in the air, heavier than the clay tablet itself. The Archive of Laments is not the only category of its kind. Other tablets, filed under different classifications, sit nearby. They shift the focus from divine failure in a time of crisis to the operational logic of the cosmos during periods of stability. These are not records of grief, but of procedure. One such document, a long administrative narrative known to us as the Atrahasis epic, begins not with a city, but with a problem of cosmic labor. Before the creation of humanity, the text specifies that the junior gods were tasked with the physical maintenance of the universe. They dug the rivers. They maintained the canals. The work was difficult, and the record states they eventually went on strike. The tablet then documents the solution proposed by the Divine Council. To resolve this labor dispute, a new class of being would be manufactured: humanity. Their purpose, as stated in the administrative brief, was singular. They were to take over the burdensome work of the junior gods, to maintain the cosmic infrastructure so that the divine hierarchy could function without interruption. The creation of our species is thus recorded not as a sacred act of love or a grand cosmic plan, but as a practical solution to an internal staffing problem. The text is clear, direct, and without ceremony. It is an entry detailing a change in resource allocation. The record continues, cataloging the early history of this new workforce. Humanity multiplies. Cities are built. The project is, for a time, successful. But a new problem arises, one of logistics and environmental impact. A specific line on Tablet 2 of the Epic Records. The complaint of the chief administrator, the god Enlil. The text states that the noise of humanity, their sheer numbers and activity, had grown so loud that he was unable to sleep. The problem is framed as one of noise pollution, an unforeseen consequence of the initial project. This complaint is not ignored. It is formally tabled at a meeting of the Divine Assembly. The Atrahasis text preserves the proceedings. The gods discuss the problem of human overpopulation and its associated noise. Various solutions are proposed and attempted: plague, then drought, then famine. Each is recorded as a specific measure, a targeted intervention designed to reduce the population, and therefore the sound. The text reads like the minutes of a series of frustrating administrative meetings, where each attempted solution fails to achieve its stated objective. The problem persists. The noise does not abate. Finally, a terminal solution is approved. The Assembly of Gods, with Enlil presiding, votes to resolve the issue by means of a great flood. The decision is recorded with the same procedural finality as any other decree. The purpose of the cataclysm is not presented as a moral judgment on human wickedness or a punishment for sin. The reason, etched into the clay for eternity, is the one submitted in the original complaint. The noise was preventing a senior administrator from getting adequate rest. It was a matter of cosmic noise abatement. The scribe's hand does not falter here. The wedges that form the words for flood and destruction are pressed with the same depth and care as those for labor and canals. There is a uniformity to the script that suggests the content was secondary to the act of recording it. The event, no matter its scale, was simply another entry to be made, another line item in the long and complex ledger of cosmic management. The hand that recorded the creation of humanity also recorded the administrative decision for its near-total erasure. We now turn from narrative records to another form of documentation: the list. Sumerian archives are filled with them. Lists of kings, lists of rations, lists of temple offerings, and among them we find inventories of a different kind. These tablets catalog a series of abstract concepts and technologies that underpin civilization itself. They are referred to as the Me, and there are over 100 of them listed in the surviving texts. They are treated not as ideas, but as discrete, transferable objects. One text, the myth of Inanna and Enki, details the transfer of these objects. The goddess Inanna travels to the city of Eridu, home of the god of wisdom, Enki. There, she acquires the Me from him. The text does not say she learns them or is inspired by them. It says she takes them. The list of items she loads onto her boat of heaven is meticulously recorded. It includes, among dozens of others, kingship, the priestly office, truth, the scribal arts, the craft of the carpenter, the craft of the blacksmith, the kindling of strife, the extinguishing of strife, the art of song, and the desecration of cities. Each Me is an item on a checklist. The narrative is structured around the logistics of their acquisition and transportation. After securing them, Inanna must pilot her boat back to her own city of Uruk, with Enki's servants in pursuit, attempting to reclaim the stolen assets. The story is not one of divine revelation, but of a high-stakes transfer of cosmic property. The power to create a civilization, or to destroy one, is presented as a portfolio of technologies that can be held, counted, and moved from one jurisdiction to another. In the silence of the archive, one can almost hear the faint scrape of the stylus on wet clay as these lists were compiled. Perhaps the hour is late, much like it is now. This might be a good moment to simply notice the time, wherever you are. To mark it. A small personal record of the moment this file was opened. A quiet acknowledgement of the hour in which this particular inventory was examined. The language used in these texts is consistently concrete. The Me are not bestowed. They are given. They are not learned. They are taken. Inanna places them on her boat. This choice of verb is not accidental. It is the language of inventory and shipping, of loading cargo. It suggests that divine authority and the very functions of a complex society are not inherent qualities of the gods, but a collection of operational assets, a standardized toolkit for reality management that can be owned, lost, or even stolen. We find another category of record, the legal code. In the Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the oldest surviving law codes, the preamble states that the gods En and Enlil have appointed the moon god Nanna as the king of Ur. They have then, in turn, delegated earthly kingship to the human ruler Ur-Nammu. The structure is one of a clear chain of command. Power is not absolute. It is delegated. Authority is handed down from one level of the hierarchy to the next, like a royal scepter or a seal of office. The right to rule is a commission, not an intrinsic state of being. These legal preambles function as a kind of cosmic organizational chart. They establish the reporting structure of the universe. Enlil reports to no one specified, but he delegates regional authority to city gods like Nanna. Nanna, in turn, delegates the day-to-day management of the city-state to a human king. The king's legitimacy is therefore derived from his proper place within this documented, bureaucratic structure. His power is real, but it is conditional, dependent on the continued sanction of his divine superiors. Consider the implications of such a system. If power is delegated, it can also, presumably, be revoked. If authority is an appointment, it implies the existence of an appointing power, a system of rules that governs such appointments. The gods are not acting out of pure will. They are operating within a pre-existing legal and administrative framework. They are filling roles, executing duties, and managing their assigned territories according to a set of protocols. The scribe records all of this with dispassion. The appointment of a king is noted with the same formulaic language as a grain receipt. A decree from Enlil carries the weight of a legal judgment, but its form on the tablet is that of a memorandum. The repetition is the point. It establishes that these are not unique, miraculous events, but the routine operations of a vast and ancient bureaucracy. The universe is not run by magic. It is administered. The tablets do not speak of a single, all-powerful creator. Instead, they present a committee. Decisions of great import, like the creation of humanity or the destruction of a city, are made in an assembly. The texts record debates, dissenting opinions, and voting. In the story of the flood, the god Enki disagrees with the decision to destroy humanity and acts covertly to save one man, Ziusudra. This is recorded not as a heroic rebellion, but as a breach of protocol by one member of the board. This model of a divine council is a recurring feature in the administrative records. It suggests a system of checks and balances, of factional disputes, and political maneuvering. The fate of the world is not the vision of a single mind, but the negotiated outcome of a committee meeting. The universe is governed by a body that can be indecisive, prone to internal conflict, and capable of making disastrously short-sighted decisions based on the personal comfort of one of its senior members. We are left with the raw data, entered into the clay by 1,000 unknown hands. A record of a labor strike by junior gods. A memo citing noise pollution as the reason for a global flood. An inventory of transferable civilization-building technologies. A legal framework establishing a clear, hierarchical chain of command. These are not poems designed to inspire faith. They are the cold, hard paperwork of the cosmos. And they were filed away, carefully, in the great temple libraries, as if for a future audit. The work of the archivist is not always one of discovery, but of arrangement. The fragments have been with us for more than a century, resting on velvet trays in climate-controlled vaults. The act that changes things is simpler. It is the act of placing them side by side. On a long, dark table under a single low light, the researcher arranges the evidence. The tablet of the Lament for Ur, CBS 114051, a fragment of the Atrahasis epic, a clean replica of the list of the Me, 3 distinct categories of record, from different times, for different purposes. Until now. The first comparison is immediate, almost jarring in its simplicity. The researcher's finger traces a line on the lament, where the god Nana weeps for his city, powerless to stop the storm decreed by the council. Then, the finger moves to the Atrahasis tablet, to the passage where the great god Enlil cannot command the silence he desires. In one, a failure to protect. In the other, a failure to control. Both are records of a limit. They are entries in a logbook of divine inadequacy, filed under separate headings but describing the same fundamental condition. A pattern begins to form in the quiet of the room, a resonance between the pieces of baked clay. It is the pattern of constrained power. These are not beings of absolute will. They are executives, bound by procedure and consequence. Nana's grief is not just an emotional outburst. It is the documented result of emotion he lost in a committee meeting. Enlil's anger is not the wrath of a creator. It is the frustration of a manager whose directives are proving ineffective against an unforeseen operational problem. The system they inhabit seems to have rules that apply even to them. One can almost feel the immense pressure of time that these objects have endured. The dust of millennia has been brushed away, but a different kind of weight remains. It is the weight of the information they carry, the consistency of their strange reports. The air in the room is still. The only sound is the quiet hum of the archival lighting, a sound that seems to amplify the silence emanating from the script itself. The pattern is no longer an idea. It is a physical presence on the table. Now a second layer of the pattern emerges, one of response. When faced with their limitations, the entities in these records default to a specific mode of action: administration. Nana's failure results in the commissioning of a formal lament, a document for the archives. Enlil's frustration with the noise of humanity leads not to a single decisive act, but to a series of escalating documented sanctions: a plague, a drought, a famine. Each is an attempt to solve a problem through policy, and each failure is implicitly recorded before the next attempt is made. The researcher introduces a third document into the arrangement. Not a narrative, but a preamble to a law code, perhaps that of Ur-Nammu. Its language is dry, legalistic. It outlines the cosmic hierarchy, the delegation of authority from the high gods An and Enlil down to the city god, and from the city god down to the human king. It reads like the Articles of Incorporation for the universe, establishing a clear and rigid chain of command. It is a document of pure structure. This legal text acts as a key, locking the other records into a single, coherent framework. The lament for Ur is now readable as a report on a breakdown within that established chain of command. The city god, Nana, a regional manager, was overruled by the central board. The Atrahasis epic becomes the documented minutes of that board's meetings, detailing their flawed and contentious policy-making process regarding the Humanity Project. The universe these tablets describe is not governed by faith, but by bylaws. What we are looking at, then, are not separate myths. They are not morality tales or poetic allegories. Laid out together, they form a dossier. They are case files from a celestial bureaucracy. The lament is a field report on a catastrophic asset loss. The Atrahasis is an internal memorandum justifying a radical downsizing of personnel. The law codes are the corporate governance charter. The scribes were not priests in the way we understand the term. They were clerks, compiling the paperwork of the cosmos. To continue following this thread is to accept the nature of the archive itself. It requires a certain quiet patience, a willingness to sit with the records long after the initial shock has passed. It is a commitment to seeing the whole file, not just the summary that is offered in more accessible histories. This is the work that is done in the silent hours. Now, the final piece is brought to the table: the list of the Me, over 100 specific powers and concepts of civilization, catalogued like inventory in a warehouse. Kingship, the scribal art, the kindling of strife, the desecration of cities. They are not described as divine attributes, but as discrete, transferable assets. The researcher places this list beside the narrative of Ur's destruction. The connection is chillingly direct. The pattern sharpens into a new, more disturbing focus. The desecration of cities is not just a turn of phrase. It is item number 98 on an official inventory list. This implies the destruction of Ur was not a unique tragedy or a singular divine judgment. It was the deployment of a standard, catalogued piece of cosmic technology. The storm that swept the city away was an operational tool, taken from the divine armory and used to fulfill a decision made by the council. This reframes the very nature of divine power as it is recorded here. The gods are not the source of these abilities. They are their custodians. They wield the Me, but they did not create them. Their authority seems to stem not from an intrinsic, ineffable quality, but from their possession of this portfolio of operational protocols. Power in this system is not a state of being. It is an inventory that can be managed, transferred, and, as the myth of Inanna and Enki demonstrates, even stolen. There is a long pause. The researcher does not touch the tablets. The arrangement is complete. The connections are no longer interpretive. They are visual. They are structural. The same logic, the same cold administrative tone, flows through all of them. A story of failure, a record of policy, a legal framework, and an asset list. Together, they form a single, unsettlingly coherent system. And through it all, there is the silent, constant presence of the scribe. The hand that pressed the wedges for Nana's grief is indistinguishable from the hand that listed the me or recorded the flood decree. The uniformity of the cuneiform, its dispassionate precision across wildly different contexts, is perhaps the most significant part of the pattern. It is the signature of a scribal culture trained to a single, overarching standard of documentation. This consistency suggests a profound institutional discipline. It speaks of a scribal mandate that superseded the content of the records. The protocol was to record everything: divine incompetence, controversial policy decisions, inventories of cosmic power, with the same detached bureaucratic rigor. The primary duty was not to praise, but to file, to ensure the archive was complete, no matter how unsettling its contents. The work of the modern researcher, then, is less a matter of translation and more one of recollation. The pattern was not hidden. It was simply distributed across different genres of text, filed in different sections of the temple library. The act of bringing them together on a single table reveals what was always there, not a collection of disparate beliefs, but the meticulously kept records of a single, ancient, and deeply flawed cosmic administration. So the pattern is this: a universe governed by a committee of limited beings, operating within a strict legal hierarchy, using a standardized toolkit of powers they do not own, whose operational failures are documented with cold precision by a class of archivist priests. This is the system that emerges when the dust is cleared, and the files are read in sequence. It is the structure that the scribes of Sumer preserved for 4,000 years. The light on the table seems to isolate the artifacts from the surrounding darkness. They are no longer just objects. They are evidence of a system. The pattern they form does not answer the original question of why a god would fail. Instead, it presents a much larger and more difficult one. What kind of universe functions this way? And for what purpose was it so carefully, so relentlessly documented? The pattern is no longer a matter of interpretation. It is a structure, laid bare on the archival table. Now, the inquiry must move from the system to the personnel who operate it. The records do not speak of formless, ethereal powers. They name individuals. They assign titles. They log actions and decisions with the dispassionate clarity of a personnel file. We are no longer looking at a belief system. We are reviewing an organizational roster, a list of the entities who manage this corner of the cosmos. Their names are known. Their functions are documented. The first name that recurs with administrative weight is Enlil. The tablets do not describe him as a god of the storm in a poetic sense. They present him as the chairman of the divine assembly, the presiding officer. In the Atrahasis record, his primary documented action is the lodging of a formal complaint. The file notes the issue was the excessive noise produced by the human workforce, which was interfering with his ability to rest. This complaint is the catalyst for a series of board meetings and policy decisions that will culminate in a global cataclysm. His role is not that of a creator, but of a senior executive troubled by an operational inefficiency. This is the nature of the being at the apex of the documented hierarchy. His recorded motivations are not cosmic, but personal. Not evil, but irritable. The scribe does not editorialize. He simply records the motion as it was tabled. The noise is a problem. A solution is required. The fate of the world is thus tied to the sleep schedule of a senior administrator. The record suggests a universe where the greatest dangers arise not from grand moral conflicts, but from the mundane frustrations of management. The scale is immense, but the dynamic is unsettlingly familiar. Power is not concentrated in this single figure. The records are consistent on this point. All major policy decisions are routed through an assembly. This body is referred to as the Anunnaki, the Council of the Great Gods. They meet, they debate, they vote. The decision to create humanity was a committee resolution to solve a labor shortage. The decision to destroy humanity was a majority vote to resolve a noise complaint. The universe is not a monarchy. It is a bureaucracy governed by committee. The fate of existence is subject to parliamentary procedure. The implication of such a structure is profound. No single entity possesses absolute authority. Power is distributed, negotiated, and subject to the push and pull of factional interests. This is a system designed with checks and balances, one where even the chairman of the board cannot act unilaterally on major issues. He must persuade, build consensus, and secure a vote. The cosmic order is not a singular vision, but a negotiated compromise, arrived at in a boardroom that has been in session for an eternity. We turn to another file, the Lament for Ur. Here, a different functionary is named. Nana, the moon god. His documented title is not merely patron deity, but the appointed governor of the city-state of Ur. The text is a formal record of his response to the destruction of his assigned territory. He is not depicted as a warrior fighting for his people, but as a regional manager filing a grievance after a catastrophic and unauthorized action was taken in his jurisdiction by the central office. His lament is a report on his own inability to countermand a directive from the main assembly. The record frames his failure not as a moral or spiritual lapse, but as a procedural one. He lacked the authority to veto the decision. His power was real, but it was limited to his specific, delegated sphere of influence. He could manage the affairs of Ur, but he could not protect it from a policy decision made at a higher level of the administration. The grief documented in the lament is the emotional fallout of a rigid and unforgiving chain of command. He is a mid-level executive who has just been forced to witness the liquidation of his most important asset. Within the records of the assembly, another key figure emerges. Enki. His formal title is often given as Lord of the Abyss, of wisdom and magic, but his function in the administrative narratives is more specific. He is the head of a technical department, the master craftsman and engineer of the council. It is he who designs the human worker. And it is he who, in the matter of the flood, is recorded as the lone dissenting voice on the board. He votes against the resolution for total annihilation. When his vote fails, his next recorded action is a breach of protocol. He covertly leaks the assembly's decision to a human, a certain Zeusudra, providing him with the technical specifications to construct a vessel that can survive the coming cataclysm. This is not recorded as an act of divine mercy. It is documented as an internal security leak, an act of corporate espionage. One of the senior partners has acted against the unanimous decision of the board, using his departmental expertise to sabotage a corporate directive he disagreed with. The existence of a recorded dissenter tells us that the administration was not monolithic. It contained internal friction, competing agendas, and members who were willing to act against established policy. The system was not perfectly efficient. It was subject to the same internal politics and ideological struggles that define any complex organization. Enki's action suggests that the cosmic government was not just a bureaucracy, but a political one, with factions vying for influence over the direction of the entire project. Then there is the figure of Inanna. In the narratives, her actions are not those of a static governor or a dissenting engineer, but of an ambitious agent of expansion. The text concerning the Me records her journey to the city of Eridu, the seat of Enki's power. Her stated purpose is the acquisition of the 100 foundational technologies of civilization. The record is clear. She does not receive them as a gift. She takes them, loading them onto her boat of heaven while Enki is incapacitated. Her story is a log of a high-stakes corporate raid, a successful hostile takeover of a rival department's core assets. The language of the text is that of logistics, not revelation. It lists the items she acquires, from kingship to the craft of the leatherworker, as if ticking them off an inventory sheet. Her journey back to her home city of Uruk is a high-speed transit, evading the agents sent by Enki to reclaim the stolen property. She is not a goddess of love and war in the abstract. She is a documented acquirer of strategic assets, an executive who expands her own department's power and influence through aggressive and ethically questionable corporate maneuvers. One pauses to consider these figures together. A chairman concerned with his personal comfort. A regional governor powerless against the central office. A chief engineer who leaks sensitive information. An ambitious executive who acquires assets through deception. They are never described by their intrinsic nature, only by their titles, their departmental responsibilities, and their logged actions. They are defined entirely by their jobs within the cosmic administration. The scribes were not writing theology, they were keeping minutes. And behind these named executives, the records hint at something else, a structure that precedes them. The me are assets they can wield, but the tablets never state that they created them. The assembly operates by rules of order, but no text explains who wrote those rules. The functionaries are assigned their jurisdictions, but the records are silent on the ultimate appointing authority. There is a sense of a system that is older and more fundamental than the beings who currently operate it. The hand of the scribe moves across the clay, indifferent to the content. The entry for Enlil's complaint is formed with the same precise wedges as the list of Inanna's stolen technologies. The record of Nana's grief uses the same script as the minutes of the vote for humanity's destruction. This uniformity is the signature of a scribal class whose primary duty was not to the personalities of the gods, but to the integrity of the archive itself. Their mandate was to file the report, regardless of its implications. We are left not with a pantheon of gods, but with an organizational chart etched in stone. A list of personnel, their roles, and their documented performance, both successful and catastrophic. The great mystery preserved in the temple libraries of Sumer is not, it seems, a spiritual one. The silence at the heart of the archive does not concern the nature of the divine. It concerns the true nature of the corporation they served. The evidence, laid out on the archival table, forms a coherent system. But now we must look not at the tablets, but at the spaces between them. The inquiry moves from what was recorded to what was omitted. We turn our attention to the silence, to the gaps in the strata of both earth and information. The true antagonist of this story is not a being, but an absence, a carefully maintained void that appears at every critical juncture. The work now is to map the edges of this emptiness, to understand the shape of what is not there. We begin in the field, with the raw material of archaeology. The cities of ancient Mesopotamia are not found on a flat plain. They are tells, artificial mounds formed by millennia of rebuilding, one city upon the rubble of the next. An excavator's trench cuts through time, revealing these layers, the strata, like pages in a book. A layer of ash from a great fire, the foundations of a temple, the packed earth of a street. Each layer is a record, but sometimes a page is missing. Sometimes the sequence is violently interrupted. At the site of Uruk, the world's first great city, archaeologists have documented this phenomenon. Below, the layers of the Uruk period are thick with evidence of an explosion of complexity. The first writing, monumental architecture, mass production of goods. Above, the layers of the subsequent Jemdet-Nasr period show a different, simpler society. Between them, there is often not a clean transition, but a layer of debris, of abandonment, of silence. A period of immense innovation is followed by a gap, a time from which very few records, architectural or textual, have survived. History seems to pause, to hold its breath. The physical reality of this gap is stark. It is a wound in the earth. One can stand in a trench and place a hand on the precise boundary where a civilization faltered. The soil changes color and texture. The density of artifacts drops away to almost nothing. It is the material evidence of an interruption, a system crash from which the society had to reboot in a different form. The wind that blows across these ruins carries no stories from this specific interval, only the dust of a period that has been, for all intents and purposes, erased from the physical ledger. This pattern of interruption is not confined to the soil. It is replicated with unnerving precision in the documentary record itself. We turn to the Sumerian king list, that strange and meticulous document that chronicles the dynasties of Mesopotamia. For much of its length, it is a seamless account of succession. King follows king, city follows city, the transfer of power logged with the dispassionate tone of an administrative handover. The reigns are impossibly long, the continuity absolute, until it is not. The list contains the most famous interruption in ancient literature. After cataloging a series of antediluvian kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years, the scribe inserts a single, stark line. It reads, "Then the flood swept over." After this entry, the list resumes. Kingship is once again lowered from heaven. But the nature of the data has fundamentally changed. The reigns are now of a human scale. 20 years, 40 years, 100 years. The scribe offers no theological explanation, no moral justification. The flood is not presented as a story, but as a hard dividing line in the data set, a catastrophic event that reset the operating parameters of reality. The silence that follows this entry is more profound than the statement itself. The list does not attempt to reconcile the two realities it presents. It simply juxtaposes them. The world before the flood and the world after are recorded in the same dispassionate hand, on the same tablet, but they are operationally incompatible. The scribe functions as an archivist of two different mutually exclusive systems. The break is not a narrative device. It is a documented discontinuity, a firewall in the historical record. Perhaps this is a moment to notice a gap. The silence between one beat of the heart and the next. The brief darkness between the frames of a film. A small, personal acknowledgement of an interruption. A recognition of the voids that structure all continuity. The records that describe the administrative decision for the flood, like the Atrahasis epic, are filed away. The documents that come after the flood never refer back to the original justification. The problem of humanity's noise is never mentioned again. The policy was executed, the system was reset, and the old paperwork was archived. There is no institutional memory of the reason, only of the event. The cause is sealed off, locked away in a separate file, disconnected from its consequence. It is an administrative black box. This pattern of a named but unexplained interruption recurs later in the historical record. After the collapse of the great Akkadian Empire around 2154 BCE, the scribal tradition enters another period of disruption. The king lists and chronicles name the cause. An invasion of barbarous people from the Zagros Mountains called the Gutians. The texts describe them as a destructive force that brought chaos to the land, a people who did not know how to rule. They are the named antagonists for a century of decline. Yet, the archaeological record is strangely quiet. There is no distinct layer of Gutian destruction across the cities of the south. There is no uniquely Gutian pottery, no architecture, no written language of their own found in Mesopotamia. They are a phantom army. The scribes have given a name to a period of collapse, but the physical evidence for this named cause is almost entirely absent. The Gutians exist almost exclusively in the records that blame them for a dark age. We are left observing a named void. The Gutian interregnum is a label applied to a century-long gap in centralized administration and scribal continuity. The name itself may have served a purpose, to create a record, an official explanation for a time when the records themselves failed. It is an administrative entry that papers over a black hole in the historical ledger, a way of filing the silence under a proper heading, so that the archive can remain superficially complete. This silence is not just historical, it is cosmological. We return to the list of the me, the foundational technologies of civilization. The tablets meticulously catalog them, item by item. They record their storage in the city of Eridu, under the custodianship of the god Enki. They narrate, in logistical detail, their theft and transfer to the city of Uruk by the goddess Inanna. What they never do, not once, is explain their origin. This is perhaps the most significant silence of all. The entire operating system of the cosmos, kingship, the law, the arts of war and peace, the very structure of religion, is treated as a pre-existing technology. The gods are its managers, its users, its custodians. But they are not its authors. The scribes, who recorded everything from the number of sheep in a temple flock to the private frustrations of the chairman of the divine assembly, never wrote a single line about where the me came from. The source code of reality is a closed book. The silence, then, is not an oversight. It is the antagonist. It is the unwritten law that governs the gods. It is the unrecorded origin of their power. It is the unnarrated period of collapse between one world order and the next. The entire scribal tradition seems to be a meticulous documentation of the effects of a system whose causes are deliberately, structurally omitted from the record. The silence is the negative space that gives the entire picture its true and unsettling shape. The missing layers in the earth, the hard reset in the king list, the phantom Gutian invaders, the unauthored laws of the cosmos. These are not four separate mysteries. They are manifestations of a single, consistent principle of erasure. The system is designed to document its own operations, but to conceal its origins and its moments of total systemic failure. The redactions are as methodical as the entries. The archive tells a story not only in what it says, but in what it refuses to say. We are left with the image of a broken tablet, not a fragment worn down by time, but a larger piece that was deliberately snapped in two. The cuneiform on either side of the break is clear, perfectly preserved. The sentences are complete, up to the edge. But the line that connected them, the thought that bridged the two halves, is gone. It is a physical representation of the archive itself, a collection of precise, legible records, separated by a clean, silent, and intentional break. The records do not lie in isolation. They form a landscape. When viewed from a sufficient distance, the individual tablets, the laments, the epics, the king lists, cease to be separate stories and become topographical features in a single, coherent world. The disturbing consistency between them is the first, and perhaps the most important discovery. It is the quiet realization that the strange rules of one document are not an anomaly. They are the natural laws of this entire recorded reality. What was once a collection of myths has become the blueprint of a single, vast, and unnerving machine. The very existence of such a meticulous cosmic bureaucracy implies a designer. Systems of administration do not arise from chaos. They are imposed upon it. The elaborate hierarchy, the procedural rules, the detailed record-keeping, these are the hallmarks of an artificial construct, a framework engineered for a purpose. Yet the scribes, who recorded the name of every king and the disposition of every grain sack, never once wrote a line about the architect of the system itself. The most fundamental question, who designed the administration, is met with a silence so absolute it feels like a structural component of the design. This reframes the recorded limitations of the gods, their inability to act unilaterally, their defeats in council, their powerlessness in the face of larger events. These cease to be evidence of failure. They become the documented specifications of their roles. These entities are not flawed gods. They are purpose-built functionaries, operating within carefully defined parameters. Their constraints are not a bug in the system. They are a central feature of its architecture, a set of security protocols and access limitations designed to keep any single operator from possessing ultimate control. One must pause here. The air in the archive has changed. The faint scent of ancient clay and dust is now mixed with the cold, sterile feeling of a machine room. The tablets on their shelves no longer feel like the literature of a lost religion. They feel like the server racks of a forgotten network, humming with the ghost of a logic we were never meant to understand. The inquiry is no longer about the beliefs of ancient people. It is about the operating manual of their reality. The me, those transferable technologies of civilization, are the clearest evidence of this. They are not divine attributes, they are the software of reality itself. Kingship is a program that can be run. The desecration of cities is a subroutine that can be executed. The gods are not the programmers. They are the users granted specific permissions to access and deploy these tools. This implies a hierarchy far deeper than the one documented between Enlil and his subordinates. It implies a fundamental division between the user of a system and its creator. In this light, the scribe's role becomes something far more significant than a mere clerk. His unwavering, dispassionate tone is not just a professional habit. It is the mandated style of a system that demands objective logging above all else. He is the black box recorder, the flight data monitor for the entire cosmic enterprise. His hand is steady because his function is not to interpret, but to witness and to file. The terrifying neutrality of his script is the signature of a system that is interested only in data, not in the drama of its acquisition. The deliberate gaps in the record now appear in a new, more sinister light. The flood that resets the king list, the unarchaeology of the Gutians, the unwritten origin of the me. These are not simply lost information. They are redactions. They are firewalls built into the historical and cosmological database. They suggest a system that actively partitions its own history, making the data from a previous operating system inaccessible to later users. The silence is not an absence of information. It is a carefully enforced denial of access. We are standing in a library where the most important volumes have been deliberately removed from the shelves, and the catalog has been altered to hide the fact they ever existed. The silence is not empty. It is the sound of a locked door. The very structure of the archive is designed to prevent a full understanding of the project it documents. The immense span of time over which these records were kept, millennia of continuous scribal tradition, points to a purpose that must have transcended the lifespan of any single empire or civilization. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, they were perhaps merely successive generations of archivists, inheriting the duty of maintaining a single, continuous log file. The archive they so carefully curated was not for their own kings or their own people. It was for someone else. The question then becomes unavoidable. For whom was this record intended? A log of systemic resets, operational failures, and internal disputes is not a document for public worship. It serves no clear propaganda purpose for the ruling class, human or divine. It reads, more than anything, like a long and detailed performance review, a vast dataset being compiled, generation after generation, for an auditor who has not yet arrived. To follow this file is to accept that the investigation itself becomes part of a larger continuity. It is to acknowledge that some records are not meant to be closed, only observed before being passed on. And humanity's place in this system is made chillingly clear. We are a resource. The Atrahasis epic states it plainly. We were manufactured to solve a labor problem. Our cities, our civilizations, our endless noise, these are merely the operational outputs and unforeseen side effects of a workforce management solution. Our entire history, from the first city to the present moment, is a footnote in an administrative ledger, a project whose ultimate goals were never shared with the personnel. This creates an impossible contradiction at the heart of the society itself. The people built ziggurats and offered sacrifices to these entities, performing the rites of public worship. At the same time, In the back rooms of the very same temples, the scribes were filing away the cold, hard data of those same entities' managerial incompetence. It suggests a civilization forced to maintain two parallel and incompatible truths: a public-facing religion of faith, and a classified internal record of a deeply flawed cosmic administration. Everything, then, points toward a conclusion that is not a conclusion at all, but a new and more fundamental premise. There is an unwritten law, a constitution for the cosmos, that stands above the gods. They are its enforcers, its subjects, and perhaps its prisoners. They are bound by a set of rules they cannot alter, and whose origins they are not permitted to record. The true power in the universe documented on these tablets is not a being, but the system itself. There is a long silence. The weight of this implication is heavier than all the clay tablets combined. The universe is not a kingdom, but a jurisdiction. The gods are not sovereigns, but officers of a court whose laws they did not write. The silence that fills the archive is the silence of a chamber, after a judgment has been rendered from a book that no one present is allowed to read. We are left looking at a single wedge-shaped mark on a tablet from Nippur. It is no longer a character in a word, or a word in a sentence. It is a clause in an infinite contract. The text is the fine print of reality, and we are living within the terms and conditions of a document we have never seen, a document whose signatories have long since vanished, leaving only their meticulous and damning paperwork behind. The night deepens in the archive. On a plain wooden table under the low directed light, the tablet from Nippur rests. Catalog number CBS 1.051. It is no longer a document to be translated, but an object to be witnessed. It has outlasted the scribe who made it, the god it describes, the city it laments, and the civilization that filed it away. Its silence is now its primary quality, a density that seems to absorb the quiet of the room. It has waited for 4,000 years, and it seems prepared to wait for 4,000 more. The story is over, but the object remains. One can look at its surface and see not words, but a terrain, a landscape of tiny, precise impressions, a pattern of shadows and ridges in the baked clay. Each mark is a fossil, the preserved trace of a moment of pressure, a decision made by a hand long since returned to dust. To read it is to decipher a code. To simply look at it is to feel the weight of the accumulated time that has polished its edges and deepened the darkness within its grooves. The script holds its secrets not in what it says, but in the simple, undeniable fact of its own survival. Around this single object, the archive stretches out into the gloom. Rows upon rows of steel shelves hold other fragments, other voices, other reports from a world that is no longer accessible. Each box, each catalog number, is a sealed silence. The air is still, filtered, kept at a constant temperature to halt the process of decay. It is a room built to fight against time, a vault designed to hold the echoes of conversations that ended millennia ago. But the silence here is not empty. It is the compressed sound of 1,000 libraries, 1,000,000 forgotten administrative acts. This curated stillness is an echo of another, deeper quiet. The quiet of the desert at night, where the ruins of Nippur lie under a blanket of sand and stars. The wind moves over the low mounds, the only living thing in a landscape of ghosts. It whispers over the foundations of the temple where this tablet was once stored, a building that is now just a set of lines in the dirt. Here, the silence is not preserved. It is the natural state of things. It is the final condition to which all cities, and all records, eventually return. The sand that shifts in the wind is made of the same essential matter as the tablet. It is silicate, the dust of mountains worn down by an eternity of weather. The hands that formed the clay, the reeds that made the stylus, the walls of the city itself, all have been ground back into this elemental state. The record and the ruin are slowly, imperceptibly, becoming one another. The distinction between the document and the landscape it describes is a temporary one, an illusion maintained only by the shelter of the archive. And so the question remains, suspended in the cool air of the vault and the dry wind of the desert. Why create such a durable record of a system's flaws? Why give permanence to the grief of a powerless god, or to the petty irritation that doomed a world? The question is no longer about the Sumerians or their gods. It has become a question about the nature of memory itself. What is the purpose of an archive that preserves the evidence of failure with the same care as the evidence of success? We are left with the image of a hand, moving with practiced certainty in the low light of an oil lamp. The scribe's hand. It feels no tremor, no hesitation. It is an instrument of the archive, a conduit for the data stream of the cosmos. The grief of Nana, the decree of Enlil, the inventory of the me, all flow through this same steady hand and are rendered into the same dispassionate script. Perhaps the ultimate truth the scribe recorded was not in the content of the tablets, but in the discipline of his own hand. The act of recording is what matters. The act is what endures. Maybe the purpose was never to be understood, only to be preserved. The entire vast project of Mesopotamian civilization, with its cities and kings and cosmic dramas, was a vessel for the archive. The goal was not to build a world, but to create a complete and incorruptible log file of the attempt. The civilization was the machine for producing the record of its own operation. When the machine broke down, as it always did, the log file was all that was intended to survive. The great figures of the administration, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, are now little more than names attached to a series of case files. Their ambitions, their conflicts, their jurisdictional disputes have been flattened by time, reduced to marks on clay. They have become entries in their own ledger, their authority fading into the silence that now surrounds their names. They are trapped in the amber of their own bureaucracy, their power lasting only as long as the clay that recorded it. But the system they inhabited, the strange and rigid logic of its laws, feels closer now. The architecture of that cosmic administration, with its unwritten constitution and its redacted origins, has not entirely vanished. Its shadow still falls on the world, in the quiet recognition that all systems of power are ultimately governed by rules that are not of their own making. The pattern is ancient, and it has not been broken. We still live in the echo of a structure we cannot see. The vigil has been passed. The scribe has finished his work. The archaeologist has brushed away the dust. The curator has placed the object under the light. And now, we are the ones who sit in the quiet room late at night, looking at the evidence. We have become the final link in a chain of observation that stretches back 4,000 years. The responsibility is not to understand, but simply to witness, to hold the silence for a little while longer. Looking up from the table, one might imagine the stars visible through the roof of the archive. The same stars that shone down on the scribe as he worked, the same stars that wheeled over the silent ruins of Ur. They are part of a larger, colder, and far more silent system. The records on the table are a local report, a detailed account of a small and troubled project in a minor corner of the cosmos. The true scale of the administration remains, as always, unrecorded. The story does not resolve because the archive is not a story. It is a data set, and it is incomplete. The most important files are missing. The most critical entries have been deliberately erased. We are left with what was permitted to survive, a collection of procedural documents from a flawed and forgotten cosmic bureaucracy. The final truth is the shape of the silence itself, the outline of the information that is not there. The light on the table seems to dim, leaving the tablet in a pool of deepening shadow. The edges of the object begin to soften, to merge with the darkness that surrounds it. The whisper of the climate control system fades, replaced by the imagined sound of a low wind moving across an endless plain. The inquiry is over. The archive is closing. All that remains is the object, and the silence, and the weight of a question that was never meant to be answered.